Can a diagnosis be more than just a word? What happens when a doctor tells you that your death is near? Do you believe what you're told, or will your mind betray you in the end? A Diagnosis of Death by Ambrose Bierce, reimagined in English for Classic Storytime Hub. Before we dive in, subscribe for your daily stories. Now, let's go. I'm not as superstitious as some of your so-called men of science, Hover said, responding to an accusation that hadn't even been made. A few of you, I admit, cling to ideas like the immortality of the soul or the sightings of ghosts, though you won't call them that. Me, I only claim this. Sometimes the living appear where they no longer are, places they once filled so completely, so intensely, that they leave a mark behind. It's as if their presence lingers in the air, in the walls, in everything they touched. I've seen it myself. Sometimes a person's personality is so strong that it imprints itself on their surroundings, and, if the observer is the right kind of observer, an echo of them emerges, eyes like mine, for instance. Dr. Fraley smiled faintly. Ah, yes, the right kind of eyes delivering impressions to the wrong kind of brain. Exactly, Hover said, a glint of amusement in his tone. It's always satisfying when an expectation is confirmed. That was precisely the reply I anticipated. Forgive me, Dr. Fraley said, leaning forward, but you claim to know. That's a bold statement. Would you mind explaining how you came by such knowledge? Hover's expression darkened slightly. Call it hallucination, if you will. The name doesn't change the truth of what I saw. And then he began to tell the story. Last summer, he said, I went to Meridian to escape the relentless heat. I had intended to stay with a relative, but illness forced a change of plans. I found myself in different lodgings, in a house that seemed ordinary enough at first. After some effort, I finally managed to rent a vacant house that had once belonged to an eccentric doctor named Mannering. Years had passed since anyone knew his whereabouts. Not even his agent could say. He had built the house himself and lived there for about a decade with an old servant. His medical practice, modest to begin with, had been abandoned entirely after a few years. Beyond that, he had withdrawn almost completely from society, retreating into a life of solitude. The local physician, the only person Mannering still had contact with, told me that during his retirement, Mannering had immersed himself in a singular, obsessive study. The result, he said, was a book that scandalized his peers. They considered the man's ideas eccentric at best, insane at worst. I never saw the book myself, and I cannot recall its title now, but the gist of it was chilling. Mannering believed that it was possible to predict a person's death with uncanny accuracy, months, sometimes up to 18 months before it occurred. Stories circulated in the village of Mannering issuing his predictions, what some called diagnoses. In every case, those he warned died suddenly at the appointed time with no discernible cause. But that, I must emphasize, is not the story I came to tell. I mention it only because, perhaps, a physician might find it interesting. The house came furnished exactly as Mannering had left it, frozen in time, as if its former owner might return at any moment. It was not a place meant for ordinary living. The rooms felt heavy, oppressive, ill-suited for anyone who wasn't a scholar or a recluse. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to change me. A quiet sadness settled over my thoughts, a melancholy that did not belong to my nature and could not be blamed on solitude alone. I lived there entirely by myself. No servants stayed overnight. As you know, I've always been comfortable in my own company, fond of reading rather than serious study. Yet something about that house bred a constant unease, a vague sense that something was approaching, something unnamed but inevitable. The feeling was strongest in Mannering's study, which made no sense at all. It was the brightest room in the house, filled with air and light, and yet it was there that the weight pressed hardest. Dominating the room was a life-size oil portrait of Dr. Mannering. It commanded the space without effort. There was nothing grotesque or exaggerated about it. The man appeared handsome in a restrained way, perhaps 50 years old, iron-gray hair neatly kept, a clean-shaven face, and dark, penetrating eyes that seemed far too alert for painted ones. Still, something about the portrait held me. It drew my gaze again and again, until Mannering's face became uncomfortably familiar, less an image, more a presence. I would not say it frightened me, but it haunted me. One evening, carrying a lamp through the study on my way to bed, there is no gas lighting in Meridian, I stopped before the portrait, as I often did. In the wavering lamplight, the expression on the painted face seemed different. I couldn't name the change, only that it felt wrong. Not alarming, just deeply unnatural. Curious, I shifted the lamp from side to side, watching the shadows reshape his features. As I did so, an inexplicable urge seized me to turn around. I obeyed it. A man was crossing the room, walking straight toward me. When he stepped into the full circle of lamplight, my breath caught. The face was unmistakable. It was Dr. Mannering himself, alive, solid, advancing with calm certainty. It was as if the portrait had stepped down from the wall and begun to walk. "I beg your pardon," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "If you knocked, I didn't hear." He passed me, so close I could have reached out and touched him, his right forefinger raised in a silent warning. Without a word, he continued on, moving toward the door with the same calm, deliberate pace with which he had entered. But when he exited, I noticed him no more than I had his arrival. Now, I'm sure you'll dismiss this as some kind of hallucination, and if I'm honest, it felt like one. But it wasn't. It was an apparition. That study only had 2 doors. One was locked, the other led into a bedroom which had no exit. The realization struck me with a chill, though my emotional response to it doesn't matter. What matters is the encounter itself. I'm sure you think this is just another ghost story, the type that fits neatly into the mold of all the others, just a few variations here and there. But if it were just that, I wouldn't have bothered telling you, even if it was true. The man wasn't dead. In fact, I saw him today in Union Street. We brushed past each other in the crowd. The room fell silent as Halver finished his story. Dr. Fraley, deep in thought, absently drummed his fingers on the table. "Did he say anything today?" Dr. Fraley asked, his tone almost casual. "Anything that made you sure he wasn't dead?" Halver stared at him, but didn't answer. Fraley leaned forward. Perhaps he made a gesture, a sign, raised his finger like a warning. He used to do that. It was his thing, his habit, when delivering some critical diagnosis, for example. "Yes," Halver said, his voice trembling slightly. "Just like the apparition. But good God, did you ever actually know him?" His eyes flickered, his composure starting to crack. Dr. Fraley paused before answering, his tone now grave. "I knew him well. I've read his book just as every physician will one day. It's one of the most remarkable contributions to medical science this century. Yes, I knew him. I attended to him during an illness 3 years ago. He died." Halver sprang to his feet, visibly shaken. His movements were erratic as he paced the room, his thoughts clearly in turmoil. Then, as if pulled by some invisible force, he stopped in front of Fraley. His voice was strained, almost pleading. "Doctor, do you have anything to say to me? As a physician? No, Haver, Dr. Fraley replied, his voice calm but heavy. You're the healthiest man I've ever known. But as a friend, I advise you to go to your room. You play the violin like an angel. Play something light. Play something lively. Get your mind off this cursed nonsense. The following day, Haver was found dead in his room. The violin rested against his neck, the bow poised above the strings. His music stood open before him, the haunting notes of Chopin's funeral march frozen in time.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.